Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday morning to you. Welcome back to Now TV. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma, and this is what I call my morning musings. Now, like I did last week, I want to remind you that I produce YouTube videos from Monday through Friday, and that's in addition to my Now TV program. So I do a lot of filming, and the audience is growing. My subscriber list is growing. I certainly wish that it would reach 10,000, 20,000, and what have you, like some people. But at least, pardon me, the word is getting out. And we are so thankful for that. So help us on that, okay? Share the word. Share the news. Let people know. I mean, even if you're going to say, hey, man, you got to tune in and watch this crazy dude. I mean, this guy says all prophecy is fulfilled. Let's watch him together and prove it wrong. Yeah, I love that when it happens, because in lots and lots and lots of cases, I've heard from people who told me, you know what, the only reason in the world I started watching you was because somebody told me I had to watch this crazy outfit. So I thought I'd watch it to prove you wrong, and they are now firm believers in covenant eschatology. So, not afraid of examination, not afraid of challenges. We welcome that because the evidence is overwhelming for the fulfillment of all prophecy in the first century. Now, by the way, here we are, March the 11th. We have been witnessing the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. The internet is absolutely buzzing. I mean, it's on fire with so-called prophecy experts claiming, oh, the Russian invasion of the Ukraine is proof positive. We are in the last days. The end is near. I was watching I was on a website out of Jerusalem, all about the Ukrainian investigation or invasion. There was one woman telling us 5 reasons why the end and the coming of the Lord is at hand. Other videos, and like I said, I mean, you can find these videos everywhere of people claiming that the Russian invasion of Ukraine is proof positive that Gog and Magog have begun. Now, consider this, ladies and gentlemen, and I produced a YouTube video on that very question, on Ukraine and Russia and Gog and Magog. So go to my YouTube channel and just look up the Ukrainian invasion by Russia by Don K. Preston. Okay, so here's one of the points, and I want to get by this very, very quickly so that I can get into the meat of my presentation today. But think about this, ladies and gentlemen. According to Revelation chapter 20, the battle of Gog and Magog comes at the end of the millennium. Okay? Do you have that? No question about it. At the end of the millennium. Now, here's what that means. If the Russian invasion of the Ukraine is the beginning of Gog and Magog, that must mean that the end of the millennium has arrived. Seriously? It absolutely amazes me from time to time, ladies and gentlemen, of how dispensationalists, they tell us, here's the biblical timeline of the end time events. And boy, they lay it all out. You know, you got the older Larkin's chart, and you got newer charts. And boy, I mean, here's a time chart, a flow chart, if you please. This will happen, then this will happen, then this will happen. And all of a sudden, some event in the Middle East will happen, and they will claim that this event, which biblically ought to be over here, according to their own timeline, they will all of a sudden say, oh, well, look, it's here, it's now, this is proof. It's like, wait a minute. Your own timeline says it doesn't happen until way over here. And I have called attention to this in countless internet discussions, and I have had people just simply tell me, you are perverting the Bible. Well, I'm not the one telling everyone, here's the biblical timeline. And I'm not the one who is rejecting my own timeline by ripping an event that you say should be over here, and then arbitrarily, capriciously saying, well, no, I put it over here, but really it's over here. The bottom line is, ladies and gentlemen, and look, I know that some people claim that Gog and Magog in Revelation chapter 20 is different from Gog and Magog in Ezekiel 38 and 39. There is not one shred of evidence to prove that. Not even the slightest bit of proof. So if someone's going to claim that what is happening now with the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, if they're going to claim this is a fulfillment of Bible prophecy, this is Gog and Magog beginning, then by logical implication, by logical demand, you got to be saying the end of the millennium has arrived. There's no way out of it, ladies and gentlemen. So, again, go to my YouTube channel and just look up my video on the Russian invasion of the Ukraine and Gog and Magog. I think you're going to find some things there, ladies and gentlemen, that are absolutely stunning in total refutation of all of the current claims being made by so-called prophecy experts. Now, I have to be honest, and I don't want to be unkind here at all, but sometimes I think that people who claim to be prophecy experts, they realize that if they can get enough clicks on their YouTube video, they're going to make money on it. And so as I commented the other night on Two Guys in a Bible on Fulfilled Radio, fulfilledradio.com, Daniel Rogers and I do a regular Tuesday night program. And last week, on Tuesday night, we discussed the Ukrainian invasion. And I made this comment. It seems to me like every time some kid in Russia or even China, if they shoot a BB gun toward Israel, the so-called prophecy experts jump up and say, oh, this is Gog and Magog. Now, I know that's a little bit facetious. I know it's hyperbole. But you kind of get the point, don't you? That there is such paranoia over the so-called end times being present that they take any event in the Middle East or even in Europe and they say, this is it. And they overlook the fact that a year or two previously, they said the same identical thing, and they failed. And I've said this many times. It is way past time for the modern church to start calling out these false prophets, holding them accountable, and rejecting what they are saying. I mentioned a woman a few moments ago out of Israel saying 5 reasons why the coming of the Lord is near. Well, as I posted, the New Testament writers 2,000 years ago said the coming of the Lord had drawn near. Either they were right and she is wrong, or she is right and they are wrong. But if she's right and if the biblical writers are wrong, then guess what? There is no coming of the Lord. They are the inspired writers, not her or him, whoever the him might be. Ladies and gentlemen, this is serious stuff. And it gets back to the challenge of Christ, does it not? Jesus said, if I do not do the works which the Father has given me, do not believe me. And one of those works, let us not forget, the Son of Man will come in the glory of the Father with his angels and shall reward every man according to his works. And there are some standing here. And ladies and gentlemen, he said that 2,000 years ago. Some standing here will not taste of death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. And he didn't say, there are some standing here who will live for 6 days to see a vision of my coming, which is the way a lot of people try to negate the meaning of that passage. So let me urge you, ladies and gentlemen, take the message of fulfillment that I've been sharing with you now for over 2 years. Consider it carefully. Okay, I want to get back into what I just briefly introduced to you, a couple of weeks ago. We have been discussing whether or not there is a gap of so far 2,000 years between the 69th and the 70th week of Daniel chapter 9. Now, last week I discussed some things that are absolutely incredibly important. I hope that if you did not watch that program, I believe, listen to me carefully, I believe that last week's program is one of the most important programs that I've shared with you in regard to the gap, in regard to dispensationalism. So please, go back and watch that program. It is absolutely incredibly important. In a nutshell, very briefly, if there is a gap, if there's a postponement of the kingdom plan due to the Jewish rejection of Jesus and his crucifixion, then that means the death of Jesus Christ is not part of the kingdom plan. Because if his death postponed the kingdom, then his death was not necessary for the establishment of the kingdom. I mean, after all, if he came to establish the kingdom, but if his death postponed the kingdom, then his death was not part of the kingdom program. So go back and watch that video. Now, a couple of weeks ago, I introduced to you, in regard to the question, is there a gap between the 69th and the 70th week of Daniel chapter 9? I introduced to you the following fact. Number one, 70 weeks were determined to make the atonement. Well, nobody disagrees with that. All right? So that means that the making of the atonement is confined to the 70 weeks, right? I don't know of anybody that denies that. 70 weeks are determined to make the atonement, but the death of Jesus was to make the atonement. Now, so much for the claim by our dispensational friends that the church is not foretold anywhere in the Old Testament. So much for the claim that had the Jews accepted Jesus, he would not have died and the kingdom would have been established. Because you see, ladies and gentlemen, as I pointed out last week, the making of the atonement is part of the kingdom prophecy of Daniel chapter 9. Now, if the dispensationalists are right in saying and telling us that the church was not foretold anywhere in the Old Testament, then that means that the death of Christ has nothing to do with the establishment of the church. Oh, but wait! The New Testament is rife with passages that tell us that it was the death of Jesus, the death, the burial, resurrection of Jesus, that is the chief cornerstone of the new Messianic temple. He is the chief cornerstone. Acts chapter 4, 11 and 12. The church is built up on Jesus Christ. Ephesians chapter 2, you therefore are no longer strangers and foreigners, writing to Gentiles, but fellow citizens with the saints and of the household of God. Well, what's the household of God? It's the church of the living God. 1 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 15. So the Jews, along with the Gentiles, were being built up a habitation of God through the Spirit on the foundation of Jesus Christ, the chief cornerstone. But that habitation of God, that temple, was the church. So the death of Jesus is the foundation upon which the church of the living God is built. But Daniel 9 predicted 70 weeks are determined to make the atonement, and the atonement was to be accomplished by means of, not at the point of, but by means of the death of Christ. Daniel chapter 9 and verse 26. After the 62 weeks, which is technically after the 69 weeks, Messiah shall be cut off, but not for himself. In other words, he died for others. Folks, do you see the problem here? The point that I'm trying to drive home, and let me read chart number 8 that I read ever so briefly 2 or 3 weeks ago. 70 weeks were determined to make the atonement for sin. Once again, absolutely undeniable. Nobody denies that. Minor premise. But the death of Jesus was for the purpose of making the atonement. Nobody denies that either. But remember, ladies and gentlemen, the dispensationalists tell us the death of Jesus was not part of the kingdom plan, because the death of Jesus postponed the kingdom plan. You can't say that the death of Jesus is part of the kingdom plan and the kingdom prophecy if you tell us that it was the death of Jesus that postponed the establishment of the kingdom. That is just simply undeniable. It cannot be avoided. Therefore, since the 70 weeks were determined to make the atonement, and since the death of Jesus was to make the atonement, then that means the death of Jesus occurred, listen to me, within the 70 weeks, which means the claim that the rejection of Jesus and his death postponed the prophetic countdown is absolutely wrong. The death, the death of Jesus for the atonement was part and parcel, was absolutely fundamental, number one, to the kingdom program, number two, very clearly, to the atonement. And once again, you see, ladies and gentlemen, you have to understand, dispensationalists agree the death, burial, and resurrection is the foundation upon which the church is built, but they then turn around and tell us the church was not predicted anywhere in the Old Testament, yet Daniel chapter 9 mentions the death of Jesus twice, yet they tell us the death of Jesus postponed the 70-week countdown, and yet Daniel says 70 weeks are determined to make the atonement. So dispensationalists have to put the death of Jesus outside the 70 weeks. But it doesn't belong outside the 70 weeks. But again, since Daniel foretold the death of Jesus, and it foretold the death of Jesus for the atonement, and since 70 weeks were determined to make the atonement, then that means the death of Jesus was absolutely fundamental to the countdown in the countdown of the 70 weeks. It doesn't lie outside it. It did not postpone the 70-week countdown. It is fundamentally intrinsic to the 70 weeks. But that's not all, ladies and gentlemen. And this is where the doctrine of fulfillment is so absolutely consistent. And I must share with you at this particular point, going to have to hurry here. It is held by most people, by most futurists especially, that the atonement was finished, consummated, perfected at the cross. Appeal is made to Romans chapter 5, verse 9, which speaks that it was through Christ by whom we have, aorist tense, we have received the atonement. Well, there you have it, we are told. You have to excuse me. You know, my voice doctor says drinking coffee goes directly to my vocal cords, and it's just like taking a jackhammer to them. And I've kind of had a good bit of coffee so far this week as I'm filming this. So I've not done myself any favors. I have to tell you that. So I ask your indulgence to listen to me as I do the very best that I can, to speak in spite of the fact that my coffee hasn't done me any good. But I absolutely love it. Okay, so the argument is made that since Paul said in Romans chapter 5, verse 9, speaking of Christ, through whom we have, past tense, received the atonement. So the argument goes like this. Paul said we have received it. He said that prior to AD 70 and the coming of the Lord. Therefore, the view that the atonement wasn't finished until AD 70 and the coming of the Lord must be false. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is a complete and total misunderstanding of the atonement process. In Hebrews chapter 9, the writer says Christ, now, he says, at the end of the ages, Christ has appeared to put away sin through the sacrifice of himself. Well, guess what? Daniel chapter 9, verse 24 says, 70 weeks are determined to put away sin. So, Hebrews chapter 9 is very clearly concerned with Daniel chapter 9 and the 70 weeks. So once again, we are told, okay, look, Hebrews chapter 9 says Christ appeared to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. The sacrifice of Christ occurred at the cross. 70 weeks were determined to put away sin. So that proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that Daniel chapter 9, verse 24, the putting away of sin, the making of the atonement, occurred at the time of the cross. There's a major linguistic problem here, ladies and gentlemen. In the Greek, when it says in Hebrews chapter 9, and when it says in Hebrews chapter 2, 10 to 14, that Christ became flesh and blood, that through death he might destroy him who had the power of death, that is, the devil. Okay, now wait, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, we are told that had to take place at the cross. Now, what does "at" mean? Okay, and I'm not asking what does "is" mean. Okay, but "at" means, "at" is punctiliar. Punctiliar. It is a vertical reality. But that's not the words that are used in Hebrews chapter 2. It says that through death, and he uses the Greek word dia, D-I-A. Some translations render that by means of the cross. In other words, the cross would be the instrument, the cross would be the power by which Christ would destroy death along with his resurrection and along with the resurrection. Because you see, according to 1 Corinthians chapter 15, the resurrection is the time when sin would be finally put away for those in Christ. Well, wait a minute. I thought sin was put away back here at the cross. No. According to 1 Corinthians 15, Christ is the first fruits of the resurrection, but it's the resurrection at, quote, the end, at which time sin, the strength of, or the sting of death, would be put away. So you see, he's talking about what Christ initiated at the cross and which he would consummate at the end, the parousia. And so when we see and when we realize, when we recognize and honor the distinction between at the cross and through the cross, then all of a sudden we're challenged to look at other passages of Scripture. Hebrews 9 is one of those prophecies. So Christ appeared at the end of the age to put away sin through through his sacrifice. Once again, by means of his death, not at the time of his death. Now notice, Hebrews chapter 9 then tells us, Hebrews chapter 9 and verse 28. And now to those who eagerly look for him. And let me make a comment here. When it says eagerly expect him or eagerly look for him, he uses the Greek word apekdekomai. Apekdekomai, according to the lexicons and according even the church fathers, is a word that carries with it a strong sense of expectation. This is not a word that means, well, I'll just lean back, I'll just lean back in my easy chair, and, it'll happen one of these days, by and by. May or may not happen soon. It may be 1,000 years. Who knows how long it will be? No. That is not apekdekomai. Apekdekomai is it's going to happen. And in Hebrews chapter 10 and verse 37, this same writer says, speaking of that second appearing, he says, and now, in a very, very little while, the one who is coming will come and will not tarry. And yet people tell us, oh, well, Christ has delayed his coming for 2,000 years. No, ladies and gentlemen, he has not. So, Hebrews chapter 9 and verse 28 and chapter 10 and verse 37 tells us that this coming of Christ out of the most holy place. Now, what is the writer doing? He is giving us type and antitype. The high priest killed the sacrifice. He went into the most holy place, and he came back out. Christ came and appeared. He sacrificed himself, went into the most holy place, and he was coming very soon out of the most holy place. Now, what this means, ladies and gentlemen, is that unless Christ has come, we have no salvation, and the end of the 70 weeks has not happened. I'm out of time. See you next week.